playoff, baby.
Mitch.
Thanks, Kalani.
Thank you, ESPN.
Welcome on in, Cougar Tracks podcast, powered by KSLSports.com. I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. Happy as always to have you on board of the podcast, wherever and however you may be listening to the show. BYU football climbs in the college football playoff rankings. Full reaction to those playoff rankings as the Cougs continue on this season as an undefeated squad, 9-0 and now climbing in the playoff rankings and what this means for this BYU squad. You can follow me on X and Instagram at Mitch_Harper. Follow KSL Sports on X, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, wherever social medias are at. We're there at KSL Sports. And download the KSL Sports app today so you can get breaking news, BYU push notifications directly on your devices. So BYU checks in at number 6 in this week's college football playoff rankings, 3 spots up from last week where they were at number 9. I'll be honest, I'm a bit surprised that BYU climbed to 6. Not that they're not deserving. I just didn't expect them to make a jump because typically we've seen with the playoff committee in the years past when in regards to a program like BYU, that pole position at 9, or in this case 9, they usually kind of double down on those rankings if they don't have style points or a massive victory or things like that. The fact that BYU jumped 3 spots told me a couple things. One, maybe a little bit of a correction on the original ranking. 2, BYU had some teams in front of them lose. And 3, I think they valued that BYU went on the road in a power conference venue to win. And that's, again, a different situation that BYU has never been used to in their existence, is getting a little bit of the benefit of the doubt when it comes to their schedule. It's still not the greatest schedule compared to other teams, but look, when you size up all these uneven schedules within these conferences these days, it feels like many teams are avoiding the best teams in these leagues to get to these lofty records. It's been a very strange year about how the schedules are working, but BYU checks in at number 6. This is how the playoff rankings shake out. Number 1, Oregon at 10-0. Number 2, Ohio State. 3, Texas at 8-1. 4, Penn State. 5, Indiana. 6, BYU. 7, Tennessee. 8, Notre Dame. 9, Miami. 10, Alabama. 11, Ole Miss. 12, Georgia, the first team out, and then 13, Boise State. Number 14, of note for BYU, SMU. 2 other Big 12 teams in the playoff rankings, number 16, Kansas State, and number 17, Colorado. Iowa State dropped out of the rankings. It was interesting in the playoff teleconference with college football playoff chairman Ward Manuel. He was asked directly about BYU moving up after close wins. Also asked about Indiana moving up too, and Tennessee. Ward Manuel said, quote, BYU obviously undefeated, 2 wins against top 25 opponents at SMU and against Kansas State. In looking at it, as we assessed all the teams, we just felt that Indiana and BYU earned the 5 and the 6 slot, and Tennessee stayed where they are. So BYU's at 6, and what's interesting here is that BYU now, if the season ended today, would be the number 3 seed in the playoff bracket, and they would play the winner of Penn State and Ole Miss. Let me tell you, I think that would be one heck of a draw. BYU has got to find a way to get that 3 seed and play the 6-11 seed. They have to, because I think it's going to be that territory of Penn State, somewhere in there, Ole Miss, and I think those are beatable teams. They're really good, but I think BYU could win against one of those teams. I think that would be a better matchup than, say, the Buckeyes of Ohio State, maybe even Alabama potentially, Georgia if they get back into the bracket. And something to keep in mind, too, is that these teams, they can make massive jumps. And I always point this out, but the College Football Playoff Committee tears down the rankings every week and then builds them back up. But one thing of note here was that they stayed pretty true to wins and losses of the previous week and then built it up from there, and everything else kind of stayed status quo. I like that BYU climbed with considerable separation between them and Miami. Miami was way too high. The separation between them and BYU was ridiculous last week, and the committee cited eye test for Miami. Well, the eye test then failed as they lost to Georgia Tech, and then they dropped to number 9. I think that was interesting that Miami ended up just in front of Alabama. When Alabama beat LSU in the manner in which they did on the road against a top 15 LSU team who still is in the top 25 rankings at number 22, I really thought Alabama had a chance potentially to leapfrog BYU. And from an optics standpoint, that would have been awful for a Big 12 leader to get leapfrogged by a 2-loss SEC team. But I really thought maybe there was a chance. Maybe my paranoia was much ado about nothing, and the committee puts Bama at 10, which I think is fine. A 2-loss team at number 10, great, fine. You know, the thing is with the SEC and the Big Ten, I think the Big Ten's a better top-end league this year. I do, and it bears itself out in the rankings. 3 of the top 4 teams are from the Big Ten this season. The SEC, they still kind of living on just the image of what they've been in the past. It's still a great league. The depth's incredible, but I don't think it's just clearly head and shoulders above everyone. And when you can just say, oh, they had an SEC road game, they should catapult quickly up the rankings. I'm glad that they did not set that precedent. Now, things can change every single week, but I was really concerned about that. And the fact that BYU got to number 6, it puts them in a spot where they can make some real climbs. I mean, you could be looking at a situation where BYU, if they keep winning, and if they go undefeated and they win the Big 12 championship, could it be possible that BYU gets the 2 seed maybe, potentially? I mean, 2 and 3, what's maybe the big difference? But you'd probably rather play a 7 seed or a 10 seed maybe. I don't know if the 2 seed is possible, but man, if you're 13-0 and say the SEC champ is a 2-loss team, that's got to be on the table potentially for BYU. Indiana this week plays Ohio State, or in 2 weeks. And then that's going to be a fascinating game to see what plays out there. But I thought the rankings were pretty fair to BYU. And it's interesting, too, when you look at some of the ESPN FPI resume metrics. BYU second in strength of record. The only team in front of them is Oregon, number 1. Strength of schedule, BYU's at 54 according to the ESPN FPI. Oregon 51. BYU's game control dipped significantly, dropped to 13 after that win over Utah because they were not in control of that game, really much at all. And Utah was handling business. So BYU took a step back there, which those things matter, and you do not want to give this committee any sort of reasoning to drop you at all. But I think that what we've learned from this playoff ranking is that an undefeated Big 12 champ is still going to create quite a bit of separation from a 1-loss Group of 5 team. Boise State escaped against Nevada. And look, I don't want to be that elitist that says, oh, that shows that Boise's not that good. No, that's a good win still. Nevada's a much better football team than they've shown. I mean, they gave SMU everything that they could handle back in week 0. You know, that's a solid team, and it's on the road. And whenever you're going on the road and you're the top team in a conference, that's always a tough thing to navigate. But still, Boise State navigating the Mountain West is a lot lighter than the Big 12. It just is. Even though I think sometimes people want to act like the Big 12 is suddenly a Group of 5 league. It's not. This is a very balanced, strong football league that if you come out of this thing undefeated, you should be one of the top 4 teams at a minimum. And that's the great thing about this bracket, how it's structured, is that even though you're number 6, You're going to get the 3 seed, and you're going to get a first-round bye. And it's well-deserved. And I love that there's a chance, too. This gets played out. And all the debates of how is Tennessee behind BYU? How is Bama behind BYU? How is Notre Dame behind BYU? Well, Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, but how are they behind BYU? Guess what? We got a bracket now to play it all out. And I love it. And I love that BYU is in the center of this conversation in the 12-team playoff. When you look at what the bracket would look like, number 1 Oregon would play the winner of Ohio State and Boise State. 5-12. 2 seed Texas would play the winner of Alabama and Indiana. Alabama would go to Bloomington, Indiana. That's just epic stuff. BYU, the 3 seed, would play the winner of Penn State, Ole Miss. Ole Miss would go to Happy Valley. That is just absolutely incredible stuff. And then the 4 seed would be Miami, ACC presumed champ. They would then face the winner of Tennessee and Notre Dame. So that would be good stuff. I think that would be a lot of fun. I think what's interesting to me, though, is what's the gap between Miami and SMU at this point? And I bring that up because SMU's only loss is to BYU. Miami's loss is to Georgia Tech, and you could probably say they probably have likely 2 other losses. The Cal game, the Virginia Tech game, Miami. That was a controversial play call. I mean, you want to talk about controversies in the BYU-Utah game from the officiating side of things. Go back to that Virginia Tech-Miami game. That was an overturned call that on the field was ruled a touchdown. Miami's just been surviving barely. And Miami's a good football team. I do think that. But I think SMU's better right now. And I don't understand why there's that big of a gap between SMU and Miami. The committee chair, Ward Manuel, said, Miami, their offense is very dominant in terms of how they've been winning. Haven't been as consistent defensively. So is SMU. They've won very good. They were playing 2 quarterbacks at the beginning of the year. Great speed, a physical team. So we've been impressed with both. Just based on their body of work, the committee had the discussions. The feeling was that Miami was ahead of SMU in terms of their performance this year. I don't know about that. Like that the College Football Playoff Committee gave credit to BYU winning on the road against a very stout, defensive-minded Utah football team. I mean, Utah's defense was healthy along the defensive line, and BYU escaped a hostile crowd, sellout crowd, historic crowd for Rice-Eccles Stadium, and got out of there with a win. And I think that was what was impressive to me in this ranking is that BYU, even though they won close, and think back to BYU's existence in the Mountain West, in the WAC, in Independence, winning close was always a detriment. Boise State got that feeling this week. Winning close always hurt in a non-power league. Winning close in a power league, it's okay, especially when it's against a team that is your rival, but was at relative full strength on the defensive side. Offensively, of course, Utah's a mess. But you won a rock fight against Utah. And I think the committee gave some respect to BYU in that regard, and they climb up to number 6. But I love that BYU is in the thick of this debate. And I just feel like, again, the pressures that are coming with being in the playoff conversation, it doesn't seem to faze this team. They just continue to have this 1 week at a time mentality. Now, I'm really intrigued to see how they perform this week because I've been saying it for a while now that I've expected this Utah game to be a bit of a hangover spot. And then you think about how late the team went to bed, around 5:30 a.m. on Sunday morning after the game, after the celebration with The Rock and things like that. This Kansas game will be really tough for BYU. But I like it at home, and then you got Arizona State, who's the 7-2 ball club, and that's going to be good. Even though ASU's not in the top 25, ASU is playing some good football, and they might have Cam Scattaboo back this week, and that sets up a huge challenge in Tempe if BYU escapes against Kansas, and then you close out the season against an okay Houston team, not great. You should be a pretty sizable favorite. BYU could climb pretty high here. I would love to see, like, the debate. What would happen if a 2-loss SEC champ, how would they be ranked against a undefeated BYU Big 12 champ? You'd have to put BYU at number 2, I would think, and give them the 2 seed, which would be a wild turn of events if that had ended up happening. So we'll see. But it was good to see the correction from the College Football Playoff Committee this week in the rankings. Cougs getting ready to take on Kansas coming up on Saturday night, 8:15. We'll have extended pregame at 6 o'clock on KSL News Radio. Busy day today. BYU basketball tonight against Queens. Football practice. Going to go over to a signing day event for Chamberlain Burgess. So a busy day today. A lot of content that'll be coming up on KSLSports.com. And, of course, here on the podcast feed as well. So I'll talk to you next time here on the Cougar Tracks podcast, and it's powered by KSLSports.com.